Welcome, everyone, to the March 28, 2025 episode of On Iowa Politics. This week on the podcast, Chuck Grassley's post-election town hall and his thoughts on Signalgate, a couple of interesting legislative forums in western Iowa, and an Iowa sheriff's Facebook post has caused quite the kerfuffle. Hello, everyone. I'm erin.murphy, the Des Moines bureau chief for the Gazette in Cedar Rapids. We got the whole roster this week. Back with us is Gazette deputy bureau chief Tom Barton. Hello, Tom.
Hello, Erin.
Lead Des Moines bureau chief Marchel Hoff is here. Hello, Maya.
Happy Friday, Erin.
All the Fridays are happy these days. Sarah Watson of the Quad City Times is with us. Hello, Sarah.
Erin, I think there's somebody else in the group chat here or in our. Oh my gosh, it's Atlantic editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg has somehow gotten into our chat.
He's everywhere. That son of a gun. Oh, man. And Jared McNett of the Sioux City Journal is with us. Hello, Jared.
Good afternoon, Erin.
And finally, Gazette columnist Todd Dorman. Hello, Todd.
Hey, Erin. Let's go out like a lion at the end of March. How about that?
Did we come in like a lamb?
Probably. We'll probably go out like a lamb too.
All right.
Some days I feel like a leg of lamb on the grill.
Amen to that. Yes, I can appreciate that. All right. We're going to start this week with a full Chuck Grassley block. And let's kick off this block with our Sarah Watson, who hopped on the phone this week to chat with Iowa's senior senator about Signalgate, which, first of all, everything's got to be a gate these days. I guess that's the rules. Of course, that's the revelation that high-level Trump administration officials, including Vice President J.D. Vance and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, talked about military operations on the messaging app Signal in a group chat that included a journalist. And so now, if you weren't aware of all this, you get Sarah's joke at the top of the show during introductions. Sarah, what did Senator Grassley, he, by the way, whose office investigated then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server, what did Senator Grassley have to say about this episode?
Yeah, so he said that he hadn't read all of the transcripts but he did say that he had to assume, without knowing what was there, that there had to be some screw up. And that's his quote. But I don't know what extent that screw up hurts national security. End of his quote. So he pretty much took the White House's line and said, without having seen what was in the messages within what was in the chat, he was, taking the White House at their word that there was no classified information that was shared. Of course, listeners probably know, but there were exact timing of when warplanes were being launched and down to the minute or the hour, and as well as when attacks were going to happen. So it didn't include precise locations, but it did include those timings of those warplanes and attacks. And so he then sort of talked about, okay, what senators typically do when they receive classified information or receive sensitive information, and they go into what's called a SCIF. So that's like a digital safe room for so that nothing can be hacked or listened in on. And so so he said that if he were to hear that information in a SCIF, he might have drawn a different conclusion from Pete Hegseth and the administration. But again, qualifier that he didn't. He had not read the messages, so he wasn't sure. And then he was pressed about his investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server for official business during her tenure as Secretary of State under the Obama administration. The FBI investigated possible criminal violations in that case and how she handled classified information. And Grassley was chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time as well. And so he was asked, does he think that this situation also warrants further investigation? And Grassley seemed to maybe not hear the reporter's question or maybe understand the reporter's question. And he gave an answer that was, I'm not sure if he fully understands maybe what Signal is, but he said
Interesting.
he said essentially there's no connection between this because all of Clinton's stuff was on internet and things like that. And that was a quote from him. And I followed up with his staff to try to clarify, like, why does Grassley or why does his staff think that this is different from Hillary Clinton? And they said that that Hillary Clinton's she did receive or see classified information via emails on this private server that she set up, and said that is not comparable to this Signal group chat, which they repeated the claim by the White House that it did not contain classified information. So that's what he had to say about that Signalgate situation.
Yeah, that's interesting.
This probably makes more sense as like ground to kind of like go back and forth on, because like then it just sort of comes down to like definitions of what you consider classified or not, versus like, the past couple of days you had Michael Waltz on Fox News saying that, well, maybe this was hacked by Jeffrey Goldberg, which would be a much bigger problem if a boomer journalist for The Atlantic is able to hack, government group chats. That would present a much tougher thing to defend than just kind of arguing over terms like this, I would say.
Yeah,
it definitely was semantics of like this. They say it wasn't classified information, and Grassley seemed to hedge of like, I would maybe be more careful, or, so obviously somebody screwed up, but did it affect national security? Well, the White House says it didn't. Is kind of the sum up.
Right.
Also, Erin, maybe we don't need to use Gate with this one, and we could call it like Jeff Ghazi. I'm just throwing that out there as a possible option.
I mean, this whole response is sort of akin to, me denting the car when I was in high school. I mean, they don't seem to be reacting to a potential national security breach where war plans were announced ahead of time on a secure server or on an unsecure app. If Joe, I mean, can you even imagine if Joe Biden's administration, I mean, there would have been, how many hours of hearings would there be? It's just, well, and, if you elect a president that appoints amateurs into high positions of power, I guess you're supposed to be ready for the amateurish things they do.
Yeah, and to tie those 2 points together, that's such a good point, Todd. I guess the follow-up question is, and I'll make sure to ask Defense Secretary Hegseth this next time I interview him.
He's right here. He's in my house.
But hold on, let me see if I'm in the group chat. Maybe I can sneak in.
We're having margaritas early. It's fun.
But okay, whatever classified is, there wasn't any classified information. However, as my daughter likes to say, and I've now picked up, do you think it's appropriate for military options to be discussed in a group chat that is hackable and includes a journalist?
These folks
get over the word classified, and
these folks in the positions that they're in have secure means of communication to talk about this stuff, secure lines, all sorts of things where they can, tools they can use that are, secret.
Designed for that purpose.
Right. And yet they just kind of decided it would be more fun to do this on a group chat on an app. And it just shows kind of a lack of understanding how this stuff works. You had the Attorney General say yesterday, well, I don't know if any foreign governments listened in, not that I'm aware of. It's like, oh, well, then that's good enough. Good.
Oh, they didn't reach out and tell you? Hey, by the way.
So it's, I don't know.
For what it's worth, too, for people who might not know, or don't have any experience with Signal, is that it is secure, but if someone has a hold of your phone, that really doesn't matter. It's not like an app where like it's really hard to get into if you have the person's phone and it's unlocked. So there's also that issue that people raise.
That's a good point, Jared, because not a lot of people may be familiar with Signal. It is supposed to have a little higher level of security, a little more privacy to it, and so people in government. I know a lot of reporters use it for that reason when they want to talk to sensitive sources. But to your point, it's not unhackable.
Well, and if and the other thing is, if you're hoping that the journalist in question doesn't release the entirety of the conversation, don't go around calling him a liar for several hours, because guess what? He's going to prove that he's not a liar, and that's what Jeffrey Goldberg did in this case.
The guy, and I know this is going to sound like a journalist defending a journalist, but if you're on the fence about all this, try to put that aside and just hear this. The guy with all the receipts and all the records is not going to lie about what he has in his possession. He has nothing to gain by that, and he's going to, if he gets accused of lying, he's got the receipts, as they say.
Well, his reason for publishing is valid. It's news to show the American people that this is
absolutely
the way they do business right now, and yeah, we ought to know that.
Absolutely, without a doubt. All right. So, moral of the story is, kids, check all the numbers in your group chat. Make sure the Atlantic isn't in there. Sarah's not the only On Our Politics team member who hung out with Senator Grassley this week. Our own Tom Barton was not on last week's podcast because he was covering Grassley's first town hall meeting since the November election. If you listen to us weekly here, or if you follow the national news, you know that these congressional Republicans' town halls have been lit. So we were all interested to see how Grassley's would go. I'm going to ask Tom, but first we actually have a little clip, and especially if you're watching us on the YouTubes, you'll appreciate this. We have a little clip from the town hall, so let's all soak that in now and play that here.
And in fact, as I've written you before and emailed you, and you've always responded, and I appreciate that, and I honor you for that.
Yes.
I think I'm frustrated because of that civics lesson you talked about. And we have three branches of government that run this country and determine our policy on the big issues. Are we going to turn Canada into the 51st state? Are we going to take over the Great Lakes? Are we going to impose tariffs throughout the world and hurt our Iowa manufacturers who happen to sell $5 billion every year of farm equipment, road equipment to the Canadians?
Used to.
If you look at Gomaco from Ida Grove, Iowa, they have 5 locations in Canada to sell pavement equipment.
Not anymore.
Together with Pella Windows, together with Vermeer, who has a dozen. And my question, sir, and I think what's on our mind here, is where is Congress? There's only one president. It's 535 to 1. When does Congress act? When does your committee and the Judiciary Committee send a subpoena to Elon Musk?
All right, so there we go. There's a little scene. Tom, aside from that, how'd it go?
Yeah, so just one quick thing. It was not Grassley's first town hall since the new Congress convened. He also did a town hall previous to the one in Hampton in Dysart, and he may have had another town hall before that. But anyway, to your point.
Thank you. Good pitch.
Iowans' anger and frustration over funding cuts and mass firings of federal employees, led by billionaire Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency as part of Trump's effort to slash the federal government, was on full display, and it was a tense, kind of raucous affair The town hall drew a crowd of about 150 Iowans who packed a small courtroom inside the Franklin County Courthouse in Hampton, which quickly reached the room's capacity. Dozens were turned away as a line wound from the second-story courtroom down the stairs to the courthouse atrium and out the door into the parking lot. So again, I mean, you had about 150 in the courtroom, but then you had dozens who were gathered, protesting and chanting in the atrium that spilled out into the parking lot. And you saw from the clip that we just played, the individual there saying, my question, which is on all of our minds here, is where is Congress? And then, you heard that being met with cheers. To his credit, Grassley remained poised. He stayed calm. He stood stern. He addressed each speaker directly as others in the crowd interjected and shouted. And as he was heckled, he did a really good, effective job of handling the situation and letting people speak, letting people have their say, letting people vent their frustration and their anger and the concerns with actions that are being taken by the new Trump administration. Again, numerous speakers took issue with Trump's request for large-scale job cuts and the elimination of government functions. Speakers, questioned Grassley about the rule of law and on court and government oversight of Trump and his new administration, and Musk's involvement with the Department of Government Efficiency, and essentially, pleaded with Grassley and other members of Congress to stand up and do their job. They raised concerns, again, over Musk's involvement in slashing the federal government and potential conflicts of interest. They note that Musk companies like Tesla and SpaceX have received billions in government contracts, with critics pointing out that Musk's companies might benefit from decisions made by Doge, such as regulatory changes or budget cuts, targeting the agencies that have previously investigated his business or maybe currently are investigating his businesses and, regulate Tesla and SpaceX, and, have a say over the administration of the government contracts that his companies receive, and would have a say on who might get, existing outstanding federal contracts. As I mentioned, and then they also voiced concerns about Musk's team having access to sensitive private Social Security data without proper vetting, and then also noted that his team, according to court rulings, may have violated the Constitution by shuttering the U.S. Agency for International Development, robbing Congress of its authority to oversee the dissolution of an agency it created. That led to people in the room chanting or shouting, "Do your job," to provide oversight of the Trump administration. Grassley said that checks and balances of government are going to continue, and mentioned that he continues to exercise his oversight function, saying that he has an investigative staff with 33 open investigations, including one on waste in the EPA. Another clip that we can throw to here a little bit. So one of the people in the crowd was Bill Brenny of Sac City, who argued that Trump is dismantling the government, disregarding court orders, bypassing Congress, and flouting their authority. And he asked Grassley, as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, why do you believe that President Trump is above the law? And went on to say, and I'll just reinforce what others have been saying here. Why have you not spoken out for it? So we can listen to a little bit of that interaction there with Grassley.
Do you believe that President Trump is above the law? And I'll just reinforce what other people have been saying here. Why have you not spoken out for it? Job, and we have trusted you with our votes. We have sent you to Congress for decades. We expect you to follow through for what we Iowans really want our government to do, and not to have a federal government that is being dismantled by this President Trump and Elon Musk. Please stand up for what's right and do your jobs.
Your statement gives me a wonderful opportunity to explain to you that constantly, every time I go from my office to the Senate floor, there's journalists not by the dozens, but by a couple dozen, that are there to ask me questions all the time. And I take time to answer their questions. And I never see anything in print that I ever say to them. So I have to assume that you don't get a chance unless you do a vast amount of reading, that you'd ever see anything that I say to the journalists in Washington, D.C. So this is why on a weekend I put out something on my website called The Scoop that carries all the things that I have said or speeches I give on the floor of the United States Senate or press releases, because I can't count on the news media to tell you the things that I say. To make sure that I communicate to Iowans, I do 5 things every week, and then some things I do once a month with the small radio stations of Iowa, with the Des Moines Register, the Cedar Rapids Gazette, other newspapers, Radio Iowa, and also for agriculture, as many as agriculture journalists that want to ask me questions. So I try to make myself very, very available to the journalists. But if you don't read about it and know what
again, it was a tense setting. It was a tense interaction. But again, to Grassley's credit, he's, I think, the only member of Iowa's congressional delegation to date who has hosted public town halls. Now we've heard from other members of the congressional delegation, including Representatives Ashley Hinton and Marionette Miller Meeks, that they plan to continue and to hold public town halls as they've done in the past, and will continue to do so this year during this Congress. But scheduling remains TBD. We haven't heard any plans thus far for them to do something similar to what Grassley did last week.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tom. Such an interesting week for the senator. And look, the open government advocate in me totally agrees with you. And folks are absolutely free to make up their own minds about the senator's policies and the answers that they got from him at this event. But at least he was out there, and that kind of fits with his general reputation over his career of being an accessible senator to the public and to the media. And if all of our elected leaders in Iowa were as available and accessible as him, I would have a lot fewer complaints than I do. Got to move on. We got so much to cover. We could have spent the whole podcast on those 2 topics alone. Speaking of public events, Jared McNett covered a couple of interesting ones recently over in Western Iowa. I'm just going to cut straight to it. Jared, you got a couple ones to talk about, so tell us about those.
That's right, Aaron. It's a town hall and forum week here on the on Iowa Politics podcast. We're chock-a-block with them. There were 2 events last Saturday, both in Sioux City, that I ended up covering, and both of which had state legislators at them. The first was the third and final of the League of Women Voters of Sioux City forums for the session. They had one in January and they had one in February. The previous one I covered, which we talked about last month, was kind of defined by questions about obscenity laws for libraries and gender identity, because that was, I believe, right before the Governor Reynolds signed the bill into law regarding transgender Iowans. This particular forum was in a bigger room at the same place at the public museum here in town, and it had a lot about public education in a number of different ways. And so the legislators at this one were 3 Iowa House reps: J.D. Scholten, Bob Henderson, and Jacob Bossman, all of whom represent Sioux City. And Scholten, of course, is the only Democrat of the 3. And then we had 2 state senators in attendance as well, which was Kevin Alons of Salix and Rocky DeWitt of Lawton, who's dealt with pancreatic cancer. They're both Republicans. And the tone was kind of set right away in terms of being about education. The first question came from Sioux City NAACP Vice President Linda Santee, who raised concern about having to pause plans for an event that the local NAACP chapter holds with seniors from the Sioux City Community School District. And she was basically asking if the intent in going after DEI measures was to kind of create the sort of confusion that she was framing in her question about whether, such an event would be kind of permissible or not with a public entity like the school district. And DeWitt said he didn't believe that there was any ill intent in legislation focused on DEI at public institutions, and that response prompted audible laughter from a couple of people in attendance. There's a lot of audience participation, which I'll get to in a second. But Bob Henderson, who's a former public school teacher, said he didn't think anything in existing anti-DEI legislation would prohibit such an event. And then Scholten affirmed Santee's point, and he kind of said that such legislation kind of creates chaos and uncertainty. And then he also worried about what some other higher education-focused legislation might do to some of the schools and the colleges here in Sioux City. And so that was kind of one set of education stuff. Another thing that came up was a discussion about banning teaching certain ideas, such as the notion that Iowa or the country as a whole is inherently sexist or racist. That was a 2021 law that Reynolds signed. A speaker asked the legislators what their stance on academic freedom was, and Bossman said that he believed the intent of that 2021 law was to promote academic freedom and that no teachers would be criticized for teaching history. And then someone not too long after that yelled about a Department of Defense webpage focused on Jackie Robinson being taken down, which the Pentagon has said was a mistake and said that they were going to put it back up. But when that happened more than a week ago now, that sparked an avalanche of controversy, understandably, given the massive change that Jackie Robinson helped bring about. So you had somebody chiming in about that while they were discussing academic freedom. And with that topic as well, Scholten again sort of talked about the chaos and uncertainty that these kind of laws create. And more to the audience thing. I've covered a super majority of these forums since I've been here, and it was one of the more lively ones, maybe not quite on the same level as the ones around the time of like the AEA discussions or the ESA discussions, but it was still pretty lively. There was a lot of back and forth between speakers and legislators, which the moderator did her best to kind of interrupt and cut off. There were interjections from the crowd. There were back and forth between even the people asking questions because we had a school board member and a city council member sort of blaming each other for property tax increases. That was pretty enjoyable. So there's a lot of shots being taken back and forth in all number of directions at that one in the morning.
Interesting. And that wasn't the only one.
No, it was not. The other one was essentially an event for Iowa Democrats, and we had some out-of-town legislators. We had Iowa State Senators Matt Blake, Herman Kornbach, and Janice Weiner come to Sioux City to hold an event at one of the local libraries to kind of talk about ways the party could maybe get out of the rut it's in the state. And the opening bit was really, really tame. It was a lot of people just kind of getting up to talk and voice their concerns, and then the legislators who are from Ames, Iowa City, and Urbandale just kind of listening and then taking another question. And so there was not a lot of note taking that was going on my part early on, because there was a lot of just, questions and concerns you've heard before if you go to these kind of events.
Right.
And then just, all right, on to the next question. And then that completely changed when a speaker suggested to the three state legislators that Iowa Dems could or should reconsider how they discuss and prioritize trans issues. And that drew the ire of Kornbach, who said, quote, "We're not going to give up the fight." And you're right. It's a wedge issue for them, them being Republicans. They've been beating us up on it, and they're going to continue to beat us up on it. Well, God damn it. If you don't stand for something, then what the hell are you doing running for office? So pretty feisty back and forth there. And of course, one of the things that triggered that, like I mentioned, we've talked about it plenty, was the bill that Reynolds signed last month. And just before that speaker kind of drew the ire of Kornbach, there was someone in the crowd who said they were personally worried about what that new law that Reynolds signed could mean for them down the line. And Blake thanked that speaker for sharing their own experience and told them that they will never back down from folks like you. And then for her part, Weiner kind of cited Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky as a model for Democrats in talking about trans issues. Of course, he's a Democrat that's won twice in Kentucky, which is redder than Iowa. And he vetoed a measure in 2023 that banned gender-affirming care for children. So that was one sort of thing they were positing as a way to kind of talk about these issues going forward. But it was just interesting to see that sort of back and forth play out. And anytime you've got a state legislator saying stuff like that, obviously that's worth noting.
Yeah.
And then the other interesting part of the meeting was Kornbach said that in some areas of the state, it may well make more sense to recruit people who are free of party labels and independent from party politics. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see and hear more of that, especially in our parts of the state. And especially after the run that Dan Osborne made over in Nebraska last year as an independent. He lost by 6.6 points, which was way closer than the margin between Trump and Harris. So that maybe suggests that running as an independent might be helpful in states that are red like this. But even with that, it was really noteworthy to hear an elected Democrat saying that maybe we just need to have some candidates running without party ID.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you're right. That is pretty staggering to hear. I guess they've gotten to that point, right? They're in such a small minority in this state that they're finally forcing themselves to think outside the box about stuff like that. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Of course, even that can be tough, though, because some people will still think that they're just running as an independent, although they're actually running as a Democrat. But it's still something to be hearing that kind of discussion.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. Again, another good one that thanks, Jared. And we got to move on. So much good stuff to talk about this week. Back at the Capitol, looks like a case of the law fought the law, and the law won. Iowa Attorney General Brenna Bird this week filed a lawsuit as required by state law against the Winneshiek County Sheriff's Office. The backstory here is the Winneshiek County Sheriff Dan Marks in February wrote a Facebook post in which he was critical of federal immigration officers' detainer requests to local law enforcement. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds requested an investigation, and AG Bird looked into it and determined that Marks's post violated a recent state law that effectively requires Iowa law enforcement to cooperate with those detainer requests. It's a little more complicated than that, but if I go into the details, we'll be here all night. Bird determined that in order to remedy that violation, that Marks needed to delete the original post and write another one with some correcting language. And Bird provided a sort of framework for what that correcting language needed to look like. She gave the sheriff a deadline of 5 p.m. Wednesday. Marks did delete the original post, but did not post a correcting statement. And so the following day, Bird filed her lawsuit. And now, by the way, the result of this is the Wenatchee County Sheriff's Office could lose its state funding for at least 90 days. Man, this story is just something. Todd, how the heck did we get from a Facebook post to a county sheriff's office possibly losing its state funding? You're muted, Todd.
Yes, there I am. It's become kind of par for the course, especially on immigration, that there's just no room for an opinion other than round them up and deport them or send them to Guantanamo or El Salvador. This sheriff is, he's the kind of law enforcement officer you might want patrolling your county. He cares about constitutional rights, and basically said in his initial Facebook post that any detainer order they received that didn't also have, an okay from a judge, they wouldn't honor. So he was basically saying, ICE can't just pull someone off the street, put them in jail for no stated reason until they figure out a reason that they need to, state that reason ahead of time. For that, he got in trouble. The attorney general and the governor did not like that. He took a few steps off the party line on immigration, and so he was marked for punishment. He's the first person that they've caught, doing something they don't like. So of course they're making an example out of him to warn all the other sheriffs and law enforcement agencies in the state that they'd better not follow suit. So, like you said, Brenna Bird, the attorney general, gave him until Wednesday to take it down. And then not only that, handed him a statement that she wrote or that her office wrote to put in its place under his name. And so he apparently didn't want to do that. Didn't pull the post down until Thursday, and didn't use her very courteously provided text. And so now, under this law that says law enforcement officers have to do what ICE says, he's being sued, and state funding is potentially cut up. I mean, we're just kind of living in this moment where there's no tolerance for dissent. I mean, if you're the sheriff and says something about ICE detainers that the powers that be don't like, you get sued. If you're a university president or an official that says something about not liking the, getting rid of DEI, you're called on the carpet before the Board of Regents. They're scrubbing web pages to get rid of every bit of evidence that DEI ever existed. If you're a teacher and you maybe mention LGBTQ people to an elementary class, you might get called in front of the Board of Educational Examiners with your license in jeopardy. So you have to toe the line. You have to say what they want you to say, do what they want you to do, or you're going to get punished. And I think that's what happened in this case, and that's what's happening nationally. I mean, just yesterday we had the president tell the vice president to go to the Smithsonian Institution and pull out any history that he doesn't like or doesn't agree with politically. So I don't know what that's going to leave the moon lander and a dinosaur skeleton, and I don't know what they're going to leave. But they're trying to control everything.
And Todd, to part of your point on the ICE front, there's also been, national reporting this week that there was a Tufts student who's a Fulbright scholar who basically just got picked up off the street by plainclothes ICE agents. And, so that's another one of these, to kind of the point you were making.
Yeah,
Right.
and that's
a legal permanent resident with a green card.
Yeah, and that's the third one I guess we've heard of. It's been. I mean, we have video of the one yesterday. She's basically walking down the street. Two guys in masks grab her and handcuff her and take her away. I mean, that sounds like the beginning of a World War II movie, where the Nazis grab someone. So, and no, Donald Trump isn't Adolf Hitler, okay? It just is reminiscent of their playbook. So, and who knows where, I mean, did they get sent to Louisiana, Guantanamo, El Salvador? We have no idea. A judge ordered this to stop. It hasn't stopped. I mean, you got to wonder where this ends. And you have to also wonder, will this administration and all the way down to, other levels of government, will they pay attention to the rulings of federal court judges, or will they just go about their business and say, well, these judges can't enforce this, so I'm going to ignore them. And then it's there's no guardrails. We're just fully, well, I won't say exactly what we are, but it's not good. We've slipped at least into authoritarianism, and maybe worse.
I was mistaken. Didn't have a green card, but did have a valid student visa.
Yeah.
Okay.
To draw one other point on what you're saying about this case specifically that we're talking about, Todd, it's not as though Winnebago County is like an incredibly Democratic county or anything. It's not a Democratic sheriff in a Democratic county that's going against the state folks.
Yep, Republican sheriff has donated to the state Republican, or the county, Republican Party multiple times, including $1,000 donation just this past November. And the other interesting thing I think to watch this going forward as it goes through the courts now is and I stressed the Facebook post intentionally, because what I left out there in the introduction is that in the AG's investigation, in the AG's own investigation, they have determined, and they're waiting to confirm with ICE, but they've determined that the sheriff's office, for all the bluster in that Facebook post, there were 21 ICE detainer requests since I think it was 2018, and they've complied with all of them. So the Facebook post says what it says. Meantime, the Winnebago County Sheriff's Office, including under Dan Marks, has complied with every ICE detainer request that's come this way. So this punishment that's happening right now is literally all about the Facebook post. And the AG's office is arguing that Facebook post equates, and I can't remember the exact word of the language it uses, but creating, an issue with the state law. And that's why the remedy is needed, and why it didn't come, and why the lawsuit's now filed. But it will be interesting to see what the courts have to say about that.
Well, and it's not a blue county, but it's full of good Lutherans who probably do this in such a way that it's like, hey there, would you mind going to jail for a little while there? We got hot dish. So they're not blue, but you're not going to see a lot of really aggressive, Lutherans up in that neck of the woods.
I always love pointing out that they had a Norwegian language newspaper in Decorah until I think like the 90s.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there used to be a German language newspaper near the Amanas until the 90s.
Okay. I was going to say until like the 1910s, because that's when a lot of those went away.
Yeah, well, they had television until 1910, and then they went ahead with. At least that's what I remember anyway. Back then. But yeah, they should have just looked at his record and left this alone. But they just can't bear the thought of somebody some government official out there who isn't doing what they want them to do. I mean, we've seen it in cities and counties and all the local control they've taken away. So, yeah, it's all part of the big plan.
Yeah. All right. Finally this week, man, so much great. This was a week and a half. And just in the legislature, which we haven't really talked a whole lot about yet so far, there was bills on work requirements for Medicaid, nutritional requirements for SNAP, elections laws, pipelines bills, pesticide torch, property tax and tax credits overhauls, and hands-free driving, for Pete's sake. We're not even going to get to talk about hands-free driving today. We've got so much to cover. But I want to bring in Maya. Despite that heavy hitter lineup, I actually want to have Maya talk about a bill that actually flew under the radar for most. And it would be fair if it did, given that list that I just gave you. This bill has to do, and it's going to sound very familiar to Sarah too, it has to do with open records laws. So as an open government advocate, as I said earlier, I'm already hooked. And there's more to this background of why this bill came to the Iowa legislature. It goes back to a story that Sarah reported and we've talked a lot about back in the previous podcast. Maya, tell us all about it.
Yeah, Erin, I was just going to mention that you would be interested in this one because it involves open meeting and open government laws.
Woohoo! Chapter 22 for life, baby.
So this legislation was introduced by State Representative Gary Moore of Bettendorf, and he had proposed this legislation in a previous session, and it didn't go anywhere, but it didn't end up being signed into law. But it basically would expand the state's open records and meetings laws. And he says this stems from two specific situations in the Quad Cities. First was the difficulty of members of the public and media faced when seeking access to public records, including inspections reports related to the 2023 partial building collapse in downtown Davenport. And the second was when the city of Davenport approved a $1.6 million departure agreement with the city administrator without a vote in front of the public. Once I'm done giving my spiel, Sarah, feel free to jump in at any time because you are way more of an expert on these stories than I am. But just speaking about the legislation, Representative Moore basically said, 2 years have passed. We still haven't gotten answers to these questions around certain things around the building collapse. People died, someone had a leg amputated, and then taxpayer funds were channeled to former city employees, and there's still no answers to that. And he just basically said to the people of Davenport and the Quad Cities, he hears their frustration and he wants to send a strong message to the people of Davenport that, they want greater transparency and freedom of information and to hold public officials accountable. So the legislation last year, as I mentioned, passed through the House and the Senate. It didn't see any problems there, but then the Senate added on an amendment that would have expanded exceptions to open meeting requirements. And so that is why Governor Reynolds ended up vetoing it. So it was unsuccessful. But I spoke to Moore after the vote, after it passed the House this week unanimously. And he said that he has been talking to folks in the Senate. He thinks it has a better chance, and he's sure that they're not going to add on any amendment like they did last year. So basically what the legislation would do is it would increase fines for public officials who don't follow the state's open meeting or records requirements. So the current fines for that range from between $100 and $500. And then it would increase that from between $500 to $2,500, which is a pretty significant increase. And then the bill would also increase damages if a violation was knowingly committed between $1,000 and $2,500 to between $5,000 and $12,500. So again, pretty significant increase. Under the legislation, newly elected or appointed public officials would also be required to complete public records training provided by the Iowa Public Information Board within 90 days of taking oath or assuming office. But employees of the Iowa judicial branch or legislative branches or the office of the governor, and the governor herself or himself in the future would not be required to complete the training. Democratic Representative Dan Gosa of Davenport also chimed in during this discussion, and he echoed more in support for the bill, saying that he experienced issues with accessing public information during his time serving as a board member for the Davenport Community Schools. So it was just really interesting conversation around that. And yeah, Sarah, if you want to chime in with, I don't know what you're hearing from folks in the Quad Cities or what you think based on your reporting in the past.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting bill. We've covered it last year, and yeah, now it's coming up again this year. One thing that I do find interesting, at least in last year's bill, and I'm not sure if it's still in this year's bill, but there are exceptions for like lawmaker or like elected officials who say they relied on attorneys' opinions. I'm not sure if that's still in this one, but so I think there are a lot of elected officials that do pretty heavily rely on their legal opinions of local attorneys that they employ. So I don't know. That's one thing I have always thought about the bill, that especially in Davenport's case, several city officials really relied on the attorney at the time when they were like making some of these decisions on whether to settle with the city administrator and how they would release that information. So food for thought.
Yeah. Interesting. And Maya pointed out the way it got bogged down last year. It'll be interesting if it's any different this year, if they get that to the finish line. I will add to this, as much as I appreciate any bill that is designed to make government more transparent and accountable, and that's always a worthy goal. That little part of me is always wants to point out it would be nice if the legislators passing those bills would turn that focus around on themselves as well, and take a look at some of the rules that govern open records for the Iowa legislature as well, because they've got some pretty strong protections in that chamber. So
yeah, just to go off what Sarah brought up, as similar to last year's legislation, there would be exceptions for if they relied on an attorney's opinion, or if they had good reason to believe and in good faith believed facts, which if true would have indicated compliance with all the requirements of the chapter. So it still includes those exceptions, looks like.
there you go. All right. That's going to do it for this episode of Iowa Politics. Thanks for sticking with us the whole time, a little bit longer than usual, but man, we had a lot to jam in this week. If you're not already, please subscribe to us on your streaming service of choice or at YouTube, where you should also smash that like button. And you can also find the podcast each week on your preferred Gazette or Lee newspaper website. Now that you've listened to the On Iowa Politics podcast, make sure you also subscribe to the On Iowa Politics newsletter. You can subscribe to that free newsletter at the Gazette's website, thegazette.com. And lastly, don't forget that the work of everyone you heard here today, all these interesting stories that we talked about have all been reported by each of us. So make sure you go find them on the pages and websites of the Quad City Times, Muscatine Journal, Cedar Rapids Gazette, Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier, Main City Globe Gazette, Council Bluffs Daily Nonpareil, and the Sioux City Journal. For Tom Barton, Maya Marchel, Sarah Watson, Jared McNett, Todd Dorman, our guest producer, Becky Gardner. Before we go really quick, please, everybody, subscribe to your local newspaper. I have reasons for this particular pitch this week that I won't go into to not depress y'all, but just know that we're all out here doing the best that we can for you all. And maybe I'm preaching to the choir for folks who listen to a weekly political podcast. But if you're not already, please subscribe to your local newspaper and support the journalists who are working hard in your communities. We'd really appreciate that. And if you are already, thank you very much. For everyone here, I'm Erin Murphy. Be well, everyone, and be good.